All right. Is someone recording? Just making sure that
I just started. John, if you could start as well.
cool.
I've started.
Okay, cool.
Cool. Yeah. I think the takeaway from this is that, Eric, people love to hear your stories, and the team and I would be more than happy to facilitate like just a Q&A session or just a open chat with you about what you do. We can have different alumni on periodically. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, sure. I'd say let's get on with the tire presentation in the meantime, though.
Any increased alumni
Sounds good.
in involvement is wanted.
All right, you guys ready?
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna go over tire selection and kind of our thought process on how we ended up with the tires we have for 12. And this is just from the perspective of looking through TTC data and doing a little bit of analysis there and some real world, like just tire temp durometer testing. Seeing if we can like look at look at the real life stuff and look at some of the TTC stuff, which is a little bit removed from real life based on their test setup, and then correlate it. But there's no like analysis into how tires affect the car's dynamics in this. So we're going to go over benchmarking, like what are other people running and how are they doing with those tires, and then kind of go through like the main competitors as far as tires from round 6 and round 8 of TTC, and then kind of down select from there, and then look at lateral, longitudinal, camber and pressure sensitivity, warm-up runs, which have kind of been the big eye-opener on why some tires get selected over others, and then the durometer stuff that Ross did.
So as far as benchmarking goes, kind of in line with the points analysis stuff, we took it a step further in terms of tire selection. So if you were here for points analysis, you'll recognize the stuff on the left. It's the usual benchmarking stuff. It's just longer than normal. So teams are organized by number of top 10s in the past 5 years in each event. Endurance is not the normal endurance top 10. It is top 10 by fastest lap in endurance, not by final endurance time. So if the team DNF'd endurance, but they had a really fast lap, they're still here. And when we look at that and look at what tires they're running, we can start to get an idea of who's using what and how they're doing. So we have 2 pie charts here, one with tire compound choice by number of teams in this list. So all the teams on this list, I don't know, 80% of them are using Hoosiers. There's like 2 people running Continentals and 1 person running a Goodyear. This is all Michigan, by the way. And then if we look at it by number of top 10 appearances in the given dynamic events, we're seeing a lot more LC0s. And we'll get into why later. But now the LC0s are dominating over the R25Bs. So as you can see, so LC0 is a Hoosier rubber compound. R25B is a Hoosier rubber compound. 4914 is a Continental rubber compound, and D2704 is a Goodyear rubber. So as we can see from this stuff, the Hoosiers are dominating competition. Most of the top teams we talked about in points analysis, are using 16 by 7.5 LC0s. As I mentioned, the TU Graz just switched over, as well as TU Munich, at 2020 Formula Student Germany. Before that, they were running the 18 by 6 LC0. It's not available in 7.5 in the 18-inch diameter. But looking past the 16 by 7.5 LC0, the next top position is the 18 by 7.5 R25B. And like I said, yes, we're seeing teams switch from the 18s to 16s slowly, but it's happening. And then LC0s account for approximately 2/3 of the top 10 finishes. And that Goodyears, although they're really small in this particular analysis, this is just Michigan. And we've seen Goodyears place pretty well in some of the other competitions, like Australia specifically.
Monash runs them.
Yeah, exactly. So even though they're terrible in this pie chart, we still threw them in to the analysis. Just that's why. So these are the tires we're specifically interested in looking at. The Hoosier 16 by 7.5 in both LC0 and R25B flavor, as well as the Hoosier 18 by 6 LC0, the Hoosier 18 by 7.5 R25B, and that Goodyear we talked about. And then we don't have tire data for them, but the Hoosier wets that go along with the 16 by 7.5 LC0 that we would have to run as the wet backup tire.
Hey, Ross, quick point on the last slide. I think this is pretty significant that the R25B, the new 16 by 7.5, that it's actually lighter than the LC0.
That's not the case.
So
It might not be the case.
the anything with a tilde, approximate value, the ones that do not are actually weighed.
Yeah. The tildes are just like Hoosier listed on their website, and they literally say like about this weight.
So
Okay, so it's basically the same then.
Yeah.
It's unknown, but yes, they're my understanding from Hoosier is that the construction is the same for the 16s, regardless of rubber compound. So I would not be surprised if they're very close in weight.
Yeah, like negligibly different.
As opposed to the in the 18 flavor, my understanding is that they're a different construction.
Yeah.
And that the LC0 is lighter because it has a less plies, basically.
Cool.
So looking at the classic stuff, hopefully those who are here, if they don't already, attended the VD intro to VD seminar. So we're looking at slip angle versus LADF plots. The tire we have run for the last forever is in red, and the tire we are interested in is the one in green. So all data is on the same width, so it's comparable. It's also the width of the wheel we intend to run, the OZ. However, all of this data is on Kaisers because that's what they run when they collect the data. The tires in this test are pre-warmed to around 120 F, depends on the tire. And that's it. As far as caveats for the testing, that's it. So one thing that's, or a few things we've noticed. The Goodyears have nice cornering stiffness and a nice flat top, even if they have slightly lower peak LADF. The peak LADF winner is the R25B that we've been running, the 18 by 7.5. And the LC0s have lower cornering stiffness. They're relatively quote unquote floppy, right? So in this respect, the R25B that we have been running wins according to these the particular metric we're looking at here. Any questions on LADF?
I guess something that's...
So just...
Go ahead.
Sorry, just one point. Comparing the green and red squares, the peak value on the red square, which is the R25B, is higher than the green square, which is the LC0.
Right.
Yes, yes, correct.
And
I think my understanding is that's why we're running that tire now.
Yes, based on this one comparison. Yeah.
So you're here to propose why the LC0, despite the
perceived
expected decrease in max LADF, is a better choice.
Potentially a better choice, yes.
Yeah.
The other thing is that, like, we're not talking about an insignificant LADF difference here, right? We're talking about a 10% reduction in LADF.
Hey, Ross,
From roughly 700 down to 650 or something like that based on this?
Yeah, correct.
Ross, is this all being done at CalSpan or have they moved to NTRC?
This is all CalSpan.
Okay, thank
you. Any other questions on LADF?
I don't know how much better the 16s are going to get, but it looks like the lat F was still like slightly increasing at the max slip angle they tested.
True. Yeah, it's not actually peak. They don't go past 12, unfortunately for us. It would be very nice if they did, but you're right. It has not inflected yet. So longitudinal force, again, same, all data's on 7s. And their tires are pre-warmed. The biggest problem is that Calspan did not have the ability to collect longitudinal data for the 16s. So we need to infer it. So we are inferring, correctly or incorrectly, that a 16 by 7.5 LC0 will behave fairly similarly to the 18 by 6 LC0, with the caveat that it's wider, right? So we get a little bit more grip. And at the same time, we may get a little bit less grip because of the change in diameter, meaning that the length of the contact patch may go down because as you squish the circle and put a flat in it, right, the flat would be bigger on an 18. So we're assuming that an 18 by 6 is roughly comparable to a 16 by 7.5. And that may or may not be a correct assumption. We have no clue. But what we kind of see by looking at the 18 by 6 R25B, which is the second from the left, versus the red one, is that changing width has a huge effect on long F, right? Adding an extra 1.5 inches of width to the tire, it takes us from 500 to almost 600 pounds of long F, right? And we would hope that that is more important than the reduction in diameter that comes from going from an 18 to 16. And
it also looks to be increasing with vertical load too. If you look at the blue line, it's roughly, going from 50 to 150. But looking at 250 SE, you're going from 500 to almost 600.
Agreed. And yeah, we have that as the last bullet point, is that the R25B 7.5 width shows at lower normal loads to be more useful. And this would be especially good under braking, right? Under accelerating, it doesn't look good. But under braking, it is potentially the better tire. And again, we hope that this would carry over to a 16, but we have no way of knowing without having real life data.
And I doubt we're ever going to get that. The reason they said they didn't do longitudinal tests on the 16s is because they had to run like a 1-inch spacer on the machine so that the 16s can actually touch the belt. And they said that for some reason they can't transmit longitudinal force using
they could only do free rolling, was my understanding.
Yeah.
Because of the spacer. So it's not that they can't get long force, it's that they can't produce slip ratios. Because they can't drive the tire. It can only free float. Yeah, unfortunately, we're never going to get TTC data for this, but we could infer it potentially from brake bias or necessary brake bias. Whether for a given normal load when we hit the brakes, which one locks up first, and how much, by extension, how much long F are we producing. And I guess we could use that to prove whether our assumptions are correct or not. The other thing of interest is that construction or compound appears to change the shape of the longitudinal stiffness, if you will, right? So again, we see the LC0 with, it had the lower cornering stiffness. It also has a lower longitudinal stiffness. Yeah. And
it's floppier.
Yeah, basically it's floppier all around. Yeah. And that kind of makes sense, right? Although I would expect with the R25B and LC0 16s having the same, our understanding being that they have the same internal construction, that they would probably have roughly the same longitudinal stiffness for that particular diameter, since they have the same construction. Any questions on longitudinal force? And then we'll get to the real meat and potatoes. Okay. Oh, not yet. Next slide. Anyway, go ahead, Arash.
So we just want to look at camber and pressure sensitivity also. So I just ran the 3 degrees of camber they test, which is 0, 2, and 4 at each pressure to kind of look at how each tire behaves. And something that's kind of weird, at least to me, is that the 16s are not camber sensitive at all, which for us is kind of good because we have no idea what the hell our compliances are. So this is a little more forgiving. And I guess another thing you can infer is that you can run less static camber with these tires, which would help you out a little bit longitudinally.
In theory, it would also help with suspension design as far as trade-offs in camber gain.
Yeah. But it's kind of interesting, like even in the positive camber. So one direction in this, they hold the tire at like a fixed angle, right? And they sweep left to right in slip angle. So one side is kind of negative camber and the other side is positive camber, but it seems like the 16s don't really care at all.
And actually, we should have looked at the, my apologies, we didn't look at the 18x6 LC0, but I have a sneaking suspicion that it's just because it's floppy. So the contact patch doesn't change that much when you tilt it because it's just flexing.
That might be the case, yeah.
And we can confirm that offline with looking at the 18x6.
So just as like a point of conversation, if we took the leftmost graphs, top and bottom,
oh, okay,
and we look at 9 degrees of, or negative 9 degrees of slip angle, the top graph, you can see a definitive separation between camber values, and on the bottom, they're basically on top of each other.
Yeah, so that's positive camber in this case.
So what that's telling you is that if you have a positive camber scenario, let's say in the rear of the car, because the front is a little bit easier to control camber because of caster and the front steering geometry, you would have, I guess, a little bit more predictability. I mean, in terms of the peak value, it might still be about the same, but it wouldn't vary as much.
Agreed.
Another thing, I guess we didn't mention this before, but so for the R25B, the 18, peak LADF was at 12 psi, and if you went either side of it, it dropped off. And for the 16s, it was at 10, but peak long F for the 18 R25B was at 8 psi. So I'm wondering if, since we don't have the data for the 16s, but let's say peak long F is at 8 for the 16 also, you kind of have a little shorter window where you're getting more force in both directions for the same tire pressure. There's not like a huge 4 psi difference between the peak in lateral and the peak in longitudinal, but that's just, I'm just like spitballing. I have no idea.
I think, and they don't test below 8 psi, but I hazard to guess that with these particular tires, as low as you can go without spinning it on the rim is probably good for XL.
That might be the case, yeah. But I mean, you would think then that a floppy or 18 would show that trend, right?
I mean, we could look at the 18x6,
but it's not the case.
Did
But
we
anyway,
look at
we're kind of getting on a tangent.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Any questions on camera sensitivity?
The next slide is just pressure, which is kind of
what you talked about.
Yeah, we kind of already talked about it. 10 psi good for 16s, 12 psi good for 18s. Next.
Okay, so meat and potatoes time. So I don't know if this was done in the past, Eric, maybe you know, but we took a look at the warm-up runs that are done at the very beginning of the TTC data. And we found some interesting stuff. So I'm going to explain how the graphs work, and then we'll get into the graphs. So the left is your usual, is a raw data, not smooth. The previous graphs you've all seen are smooth. This is raw data of slip angle versus lat F. And we start in the middle here with a cold tire, and we sweep to positive slip angle down to where I put the logo for sweep 1, right? And then we sweep back through to 0. Oops, well, I can't draw straight, but we sweep back through 0 and we sweep up to 2. And then we sweep back and go to 3, back and go to 4, back and go to 5. And you can see that the lat F increases every time we sweep because the tire is warming up. And if we look at the temperatures, that they have IR thermometers pointed at the tires while they're running them. And if we look at the surface temperature of the tire as it's sweeping through these runs, we can correlate the surface temperature of the tire with each sweep, or with time, and by extension, each sweep. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to kind of put a ballpark on what sort of lat Fs are we going to actually see for these short events. So XL, autocross, skid pad, the time is not there for the tire to actually get up to temp. And this, I think, is really key. Unfortunately, there is no warm-up data for the 16s. If I remember correctly, they didn't clean the rubber off of the IR temperature sensors before they started the testing. So it's a good thing we paid for this data. And basically, they run through these sweeps 25-ish times, and they assume the tires are warm, and then they go on with the testing. And we also noticed that there's about a ½ inch lag between the peak slip angle and the peak in the temperature. I don't have a great explanation for that, but there's a constant lag. So we apply a shift. We're assuming a shift, and there's some sort of weird lag going on. But this is how we kind of make the next page of graphs. So if we look at the tires we're interested in and the tire where we've been running, again in red and green, we can start to imagine why everyone runs LC0s. So the previous page had a big blow up of the R25B. And basically, oh, actually I forgot one thing. Let me go back a slide so you guys have a better idea. Maybe, hold on. Okay, so you see the purple and orange lines down here. Those are best and worst cases for given events. And I didn't label them on purpose, but purple is like the worst case. That's the temperature you're going to be at for skid pad. Orange is the best case. That's the temperature you're going to be at for skid pad. And these are my assumptions based on how we know skid pad works, right? So you go out, you do one lap to the right, you do a second lap to the right, and the second lap is timed, right? And we know each lap takes 5 seconds, right? So the first lap, and I realize you're not sweeping through slip angles, so there's some finagling here, but your best case is you're probably going to be somewhere in between these for the first lap of skid pad. And the second lap of skid pad is an unknown, but it's probably not going to be much hotter because the inside tire becomes the outside tire. So it didn't really heat up much because it was on the inside, not doing anything. So we can assume that we're in this region, sweeps 2 and 3. We go look at 2 and 3, and we're looking at, I don't know, 500. Yeah, about 500 pounds of lat F, right? During skid pad. And we can do the same thing with the longer lines down here. We can do the same thing for autocross. XL is a crapshoot because it's longitudinal and we don't know what happens. But we can assume the same trends. But autocross is also important. It's just longer. So we might get anywhere from here to here-ish. But this is by the end of autocross, right? So we start down here. So the first turn you do, the tires are cold, right? And then they heat up. And by the end of autocross, you might be over here, right? So anywhere from sweep 5 to sweep 7. So sweep 1, obviously, you're like here. And sweep 7, you're probably, oh, it's odd numbers, probably somewhere over here. And this assumes that the track is half left-hand turns, half right-hand turns. That may or may not be the case. It probably has more turns of one direction because you end up roughly back where you started. So there's extra turns in one direction. But if we take some liberties, we can kind of tell where we're starting with really crappy lat F, and we end with, I don't know, 600 pounds of lat F. And then we swing back around and do a second run. And we don't know if, that's actually something else we could look into the data that we didn't do. If the tire sits for 30 seconds while you get back to the front of the line and there's no heat put into the tire, how far do you fall back down? You may end up here, you may end up here. That's honestly an overlook on my part. But the second run should be slightly better. I don't know how much. In terms of, should be slightly better in terms of available lat F, not necessarily slightly better. It depends on the driver. But anyway, if we go and compare the tires themselves, we start to see why, I think personally, why a lot of people run the LC0, whether they know or not why they're running the LC0. Because we can see the R25B takes forever to heat up, and the LC0 after the first turn is pretty good. And that second turn would be the second lap of skid pad, which is a timed lap, right? So you can make a ton of points in skid pad by having hot tires, right? You can make a ton of points in autocross by having hot tires. And I think that's really the crux of the argument here.
I guess just something else I want to note. Calspan does their stuff on a belt of like 3M sandpaper. So like any heating in their test is going to be even longer in real life just because there's less energy going into the tire. So I think this like warm up difference or like cold tire performance is going to be even more exaggerated in reality.
Agreed. The other thing that's that we notice is that even though I assumed that the 18x6 was going to heat up quite a bit faster than 18x7.5, and I was wrong. It heats up roughly the same rate, which was surprising to me, even though it's narrower. And then another thing is that the Goodyear is an odd one because being TTC data, they changed the way they do it, and it starts at a hotter temperature. So it's not really comparable, unfortunately, because they like to make it so that we can't compare things, apparently. But again, it does have this nice flat top and very high camber stiffness, which I think is why some of the teams
cornering stiffness.
Cornering stiffness, which I think is why some of the teams are finding it to be a good tire to use, even if it doesn't heat up right away. If it's forgiving enough, that can improve the driver's performance enough that it overcomes it, right? And I have no good way of measuring that. Any questions on this? Okay. So if we look at peak to peak data, and I'll go back. So we're considering these sweep temperature peaks to be peaks, right? And then we also have lat F peaks, right? And they're usually out here at 12 degrees. So if we look at the peak to peak data, where we go from peak slip angle to peak slip angle as the tire heats up, this is a little less confusing, at least for me, to look at in terms of how the tire is behaving as it heats up, and we can draw trends from this. So the left is your previous tire, the green, the right is the green line, the proposed tire. We can see that within 9 sweeps, the LC0 has hit its peak. And it actually falls off from there, right? As it continues to heat up, its lat F potential starts to fall away slowly. And we see that the R25B takes forever to heat up, and we don't have enough data to really tell. It might fall off slowly as well. I would imagine, my guess is that it does as well. And then we can also see the optimum slip angle changes as the tire heats up, right? The rubber becomes more compliant. The optimum slip angle comes up to some steady state value. LC0 or the R25B's got some weird stuff going on. But actually the optimum slip angle is roughly the same for both tires. It's around 11 degrees. And then for later use, we looked at the surface temperature at the peak, right? So we see this peak here. And we found it to be like 130 degrees for the LC0. And I don't know what's going on with the 18x7.5 R25B. I have no clue what is going on here. I have no explanation for this.
That might just be me being bad at processing data.
Okay, cool.
I don't know.
Well,
I don't know.
It doesn't show up in the LC0 and it doesn't show up in the 18x6, which I have here on the next slide. Because I wanted to prove to myself that weird expansion there wasn't causing issues and that we could trust the data. So we can see that the 18x6 actually does heat a little bit faster than the 18x7.5. And it does taper off, which is why I'm also assuming that the 18x7.5 tapers off as well, right? So basically, once you hit your optimum temperature, anything past that and the tire starts to lose grip or lose lateral force capability. So if you could, you'd want to keep the tire at whatever its optimum temperature is. And this is all transient, right? Because the surface temperature is 130, but the core temperature is probably around room temperature because we're heating up so fast. So the other thing that's going on is the surface, the temperature is starting to bleed into the tire, right? And the carcass is going to start to behave differently. So we are trying to, since we can't go do testing, do some testing in the lab. So we knew or know that the peak lat F for the LC0 occurred at 130 degrees Fahrenheit. So I went and cut up an LC0 we had that was toast. It's brand new, but it has a weird life. Anyway, I cut it up into swatches, randomized the swatches, heated them up, tested their durometer, compared their durometer to what they started at, because it depends on where you are in the carcass. The durometer changes a little bit. And we have this nice plot of bulk temperature. So this is heating up the entire swatch, not just the surface, versus durometer. So, and now's when we start to make leaps of faith. So if we plot a trend line along this, we're at 34A for durometer. And that is useful to us because John went out and bought a bunch of different dopes. We doped some of the control swatches after the fact. And then I tested those swatches at room temperature. I haven't had a chance to test them at temperature yet, but at room temperature, you can see in this chart on the bottom left, we brought down the durometer using PJ1. We brought down the durometer around 5 points. Using JEG's tire softener, we brought it down on average around 5 points. And Hot Lap 2 actually brought it up, but that's probably within the margin of error on the durometer tester. I think the margin of error was plus or minus 1.2 when we tested it like 30 times. But the cool thing here is that, so the pre-dope durometer was around 40, the post-dope durometer was around 34. And if you'll recall, if we go back, we were looking at a durometer, theoretical durometer of around 34 for optimum performance. So the theory here is if we dope them to around 34, they'll be great out of the box, right? So the first turn in, they'll be great. So we basically would shift this graph such that we start here and we move this way. We skip all this junk. That's a theory. We have to go test it, right?
Hey, Ross, can you clarify that real quick? So you're saying that you made a correlation between durometer and grip, to temperature and grip? I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah, so that is my leap of faith, yes, is that I have LATF versus slip versus temperature, basically. I have peak LATF versus temperature. And if I do temperature to durometer, that I can then alter the durometer to what the peak lat F, if I take a swatch and I find its durometer at room temp, I heat it up to the optimum temperature and find its durometer. That then if if I dope it such that its durometer is what it was at optimum temp, that now I will be good out of the box.
You're saying that grip is related to durometer, so that if you can change durometer, you can change grip.
That is my leap of faith, and I understand that it is probably flawed, but my hope is that it is close.
Got it.
And this will shake out in testing, right? This might be too much doping. This might be too little doping. This is going to require testing. But we can't.
But you see a trend that by changing the durometer, you can sort of fake a temperature change by changing durometer.
It's not that I see. That is my hope. Yes, that is my hope. I have no way of proving it right now.
Understood.
Yeah. So to summarize, and again, we have to go prove the dope, but to summarize, as far as the difference between the LC0 and R25B, I think it's huge. This warm-up thing is huge, and that is why, whether other teams realize it or not, that is why the LC0 is better. Sorry, not better. That is why the LC0 places better on average. We get more usable grip earlier on in the quick events, right? And earlier on during endurance, right? But then theoretically it tapers off. But the shorter events combined score is higher than the endurance event score. And I'm not convinced we would lose points in endurance necessarily either. We also, by going to the 16s, we lose mass and inertia, meaning less unsprung weight and suspension improvements, normal load improvements there, effectively more horsepower by having lower inertia, and lower IZZ, allowing us to have higher yak. Lower camber sensitivity, as Arash mentioned, may or may not be a big deal. It's hard to know for sure. And lighter outboard assembly, theoretically possible because there's lower loads through the A-arms. That doesn't shake out right now anyway, but it's theoretically there. The R25B's got going for them is the higher peak grip, right? So once they're warm, they're better, hands down. Their higher cornering stiffness, meaning better turn-in, basically. The drivers get what they ask for. And better long F at, as you pointed out, Joey, at lower loads. So potentially better braking performance. But again, we don't know, because there's no data for the 7.5s, we don't know if that that's just because of the switch in width, or if that's an intrinsic problem with the LC0, or the floppiness of the carcass even, right? And that's it, I think, unless there are questions. I'd love to hear some questions or thoughts.
Hey, Ross. What channels do you have from the TTC data, like with temperatures? Is it just surface temp, or is there any internal temp?
They do probing before and after the major runs, is my understanding. Arash probably knows a little better. So like before they do, so they preheat the tire, and then let's say the next thing they do is lat F. It's not, but let's say the next thing they did is pure lat F. They would stop it, probe it right before, run all the lat F sweeps, probe it after. But they don't probe like right before warm up and right after warm up.
Yeah, so you only have inner, outer, middle IR surface temp.
Okay. Do they have like air temp inside the tire?
No, just ambient.
They're not monitoring that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you're working with them in the data, but you know that. Yeah, like I said before, like tires, sometimes certain tires, the surface temps are very important, but a lot of the time it's the actual bulk temp, not even the tread temp that you measure with a probe, but like what the temperature of the actual construction, like if you were to read it with an IR from the inside or thermocouple the different layers of the tire. So, and sometimes if you have a TPMS sensor that reads air temp inside the tire, that can be close. So I was kind of hopeful that they had a temp sensor measuring the air temp. It's kind of disappointing that they don't.
Yeah, a lot of things they do are a little bit disappointing.
Yeah, I know, but at least those guys know the rig. Like out of all
Yeah.
the tire rigs in North America, those guys actually know what they're working with.
Do they
There's-
plot pressure as a function of the run? Like,
They
is that
control,
one of the
they
columns?
control pressure actively.
Yeah, they hold it constant.
Oh,
Yeah.
that sucks.
Yep.
Yeah. Otherwise,
Alright.
you could have figured it out what the temperature was.
But at least with like a rig like this, you can be confident that the pressure that you're telling you they're holding it at is actually what they're holding it at. Or
Yeah.
like it's annoying to have rubber on IR temps, but they do a better job than most places that I've seen. And
So that means you need to design an active pressure valve for your tires.
Or we
Right.
could just, or we don't care for the short events. Let's be honest, they're too short.
Yeah, that's true. No, good point. That
But
was
actually-
a horrible joke.
Eric, do you think that the I would argue, I guess, that for the 3 short events, I don't particularly care about core temperature because it's not going to get hot.
yeah, I mean it's
I think
sure.
that's the thing. You can short track racers use them. You can get bleeder valves that you can't add air, of course, but they'll lower it. But I think Ross is right. For short events, it doesn't matter, and this is not a case that we're screwing with for endurance.
I mean, endurance maybe, right? Both the core temperature and the pressure, right? But for the 3 short events, I'm not too worried.
Yeah. So speaking of the 3 events in endurance, looking at this data, do you have any info that you can pass on to the drivers on what to do to warm up the tires that's more effective?
Go out for the first run of autocross with a bunch of lead in your lap.
Yeah, pretty much.
Actually, so something that Joey and I discussed as potential, and well, so
I don't think. No, we didn't.
yeah, well, anyway, okay, so there's some theories that have run around. So we talked a little bit about understanding toe out in the rear for skid pad, right? And I realized the slip angle implications, but there's also a heating implication that I think we have underestimated, especially for the inside tire, right? And I think that may come into play as well if we consider running Ackerman. And I know normally Ackerman's not super important, right? But I think actually running a shitload of pro Ackerman could heat up the inside tire, as well as having other implications. But for skid pad specifically, right, you could basically force the inside tire to heat up even though there's no load on it, potentially.
Sure. I mean, that's for us holding steady state temperature values and targeting, because our tires are extremely temp sensitive. Like we're talking a very small window. On most tracks, it's toe angle or just amount of toe on the front or the rear axle that helps determine where you settle with temp. So it's definitely a big impact on how much energy you're putting into the tire.
Yeah. So my thinking is basically, even if we think the ideal toe is low, we need to run a shitload of toe for skid pad just to heat the things up.
Yeah.
And then for autocross, there may be some trade-offs because now we're doping them into oblivion and they may overheat.
Sure. I mean, is there any thought as to like if you change your, typically for autocross, you guys use the same launch rev limiter as you do the Excel event, I'm guessing, right? Just trying to get off the line as quickly as possible.
Yep.
Like, is there, clearly there's a balance impact with tire temp, right? And you look at just the simple plots of tire temp versus slip angle and lat load. It's clear that the more load that you're putting into the tires, the hotter they get.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the very basics of it. And if you can just look at if it's worth it to do a big smoky burnout at the beginning, get a bunch of temp in the rear, drive the car into kind of an understeer balance, which allows you to run more slip angle on the front. Like that's something that I don't know if it's how relevant it is for you guys, if it's worth looking at or not. But that is something to do for faster warm up.
Do you think a big smoky burnout actually produces more energy into the tire than a quote unquote optimum slip ratio?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, you bet it
It's
does.
because the force may be lower, but the velocity is higher, right? So it ends up being a higher power.
Okay,
Like
that
it's
makes
something
sense.
that
Yeah.
we use for especially just leaving the box during the night at night races is, you know, we do a big smoky burnout as long as we can, just into the rev limiter. Like we have a mode that we switch to when it gets really cold, and then it helps build the driver's confidence right at the beginning of the stint, because then they have a car that tends to understeer when the grip's low. It's a little bit more stable, and then they can just let the front plow and work it if, you know, that track allows us to do that without actually harming the tire, and shave off a couple seconds there on the first 5 or 6 laps, right?
That's pretty cool. So what you're saying is, play back, the burnout heats up the rears. So you've now set up the car, what's going to tend to understeer. You have high slip angle going into your first turn, so you're going to warm up the fronts more than you would with a balanced car.
Yeah. And unfortunately, like the one caveat to this is like your driver has to have big balls at the end of the day, because it's putting as much load and as much slip angle and as high a velocity onto those tires as you can, right? That's how you get energy into them. So
the first couple turns, the driver's going to look like a total dork. But the benefit being that the tires are going to be hot for 95% of the course.
Yeah.
So depending on the course, but this can be.
Or you set it up for the second run. I don't know if the second run you've seen that it goes slower. Maybe if you can manage the heat soak in the powertrain,
I think
put those two together.
Yeah, I would prefer to have two. I don't trust that our drivers are going to be able to throw away the first run and have a 5% better second run.
Yeah.
It's entirely reasonable. My last thought on that was, how do they manage cars breaking down in endurance and FSE? Again, is it just you guys have to slow down to a slow pace, or?
I don't remember. I think that was the case, and then they kind of just pull the car off.
Yeah, well,
I don't know if we have like red flags or anything.
Track workers are pulling it off. I imagine it's not a red flag situation. I honestly don't remember. I remember a lot of cars breaking down. I don't remember what we had to do on course. I think we had to drive slow.
Mm-hmm.
Joey, do you remember?
So you're saying come up with a warm-up strategy for that?
Well, it's just you have data for all this warm-up data. They're just doing slip angle, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no slip ratio.
Mm-hmm.
That is correct. Yeah.
It might be worth it to look at if it's try and infer from the data. Like, I think you guys are doing a great job being realistic about what you can and cannot infer, and what is a leap of faith. And at least, like, if you don't have any data to indicate otherwise, you're using that, but you have a realistic outlook on how well it could potentially perform. But look at if slip angle is better or slip ratio is better, because like that's one thing that you'll see certain race teams, certain drivers key up on, like race teams that have figured it out, is weaving a ton doesn't add in as much heat as throttle brake, and you get your tires dirtier, which I know pickup on certain surfaces in FSE is a big problem, right?
Actually,
so getting back going again could help you out points wise, just having that first lap after you've had to drive slow because somebody broke down.
Makes sense. Thank you.
That throttle brake, if one thing that we had considered, and you can tell me if you think this is a good idea or not, is dialing the front brake bias to 100% for XL, and just holding the gas and the brake on the way back from XL.
Yeah, I mean that's reasonable. Something that we'll do if we're having trouble with keeping temp in the tires, or we're about to do a restart after being behind a safety car under yellow, is we do brake throttle overlap without changing the bias. It'd be interesting to see how much the temps increase, and if you get higher temps on the front from doing that, just from the brakes heating up, or driving the rear with a ton of slip ratio is better. So I think that's entirely the right direction to go, thinking about Excel.
If we're talking about go fast tips, I know RIT used to paint the inside of the rims flat black to absorb the radiant heat from the brakes into the air of the tires, which is obviously gonna do weird things to tire pressure. But
no, I mean that's something that I think we do, and we're very cognizant of, is analyzing the flow of the brake rotor onto the wheel, right? So
for endurance that might matter for us, but 3 short events it doesn't matter.
But just trying to be aware of how, if you're trying to keep all the heat in the rotor and you're not trying to conduct any through the top hat, or if it's worth going through the brake hat and trying to conduct it into the wheel, their thoughts. I don't know if there's a right decision for you guys there, but there are ways to manage temperature. Like the Porsche GTLM cars have what looks like a pie tin around their rear brake rotors that deflect the air coming out of the vanes away from the wheel shell, because they have issues overheating rear tires. So there are little things that you can do. I don't know if that's too fine an adjustment for what you guys are looking to get, because you guys are looking to dump as much heat as possible, right? It might not be worth the weight of anything extra that you're looking on putting up on there, except for maybe painting them black.
One thing that we did think of, and this is again going to require testing, but we know the R25B is better when it's warm. There's nothing that stops us from doping the crap out of an R25B 18 by 7.5, and then that may still be the best tire. But now at least we know why the LC0 is the winning tire, and if we can turn an R25B into a cold operatable tire, it still potentially has a higher LADF.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Are there any thoughts on, you guys are planning on doing back-to-back testing with these tires, correct?
I'm not sure if we can run the 18s without having but I don't think we can run the 18s with the same setup with the current car design. We would have to raise the CG.
Get a car to get raised, and then we would probably, if we modify the suspension, I think we looked at the kinematics of doing that, and you end up with the camber gain is just way too gnarly. We could do it for Excel in the rear, perhaps, if you want to do longitudinal stuff.
I mean,
it's out of the question.
Well, so the other thing is I cut up the LC0 and we did durometer and temp and doping on that. I just cut up the R25B on Friday, and we're going to do the same thing. So we need to see if we can even dope them into oblivion.
Sure. But I mean, just right off the bat, just testing tires undoped and doing a comparison to see how well it compares to this data. Because you're talking about tires, right? Camber gain, roll centers, these are all things that are not even close to the impact a tire has, right? If you're worried about the kinematics being a problem, throw 1,000-pound springs on the fucker and send it, just to figure out the basics. There's no reason. If you need to change the ride height by 1 inch and your car can't accommodate that, then you have a shitty race car. That's just the way it is. Like if there's not going to be much more valuable than you guys doing back-to-back comparisons on a tire, especially if you can find a surface that's really similar to the competition, because that's going to trump anything that you have here in the TTC data, because you guys are doing a great job analyzing it and being realistic about the conclusions you're drawing, and it's giving you guys good direction for development, but it's nothing compared to actually running the tires. And
what you're saying, Eric, is that if you can easily set up like an apples to apples comparison on the vehicle by putting like solid springs or really stiff springs in there, and then doing like a skid pad of various sizes, you should be able to make a comparison in terms of tire temperature and an actual grip on like vehicle level.
Yeah. I mean, I really doubt that the kinematic change from lowering the car an inch going to the larger tire is going to be even close to, that's going to be well within the noise of like whatever other setup changes, right? Like you're looking at a big difference, hopefully, with these tires. And if you don't find a big difference, then pick whichever is cheapest or looks better on the car, right? Like, but there's probably going to be a big difference.
Yeah, this correlates in my experience, but I would suggest the following: if you can test both 16s and 18s with no changes, just accept the 1-inch CG height change, so you're running exactly the same geometry, and then you can test AB with the two different tires. Then do what Eric's suggesting: lower the ride height of the car by changing the push rods and pull rods. You're now into a different place in the camber curve, and see what happens then. And so if there's not much difference, Eric's right, but I think he's also correct about the higher impact of tires on kind of overwhelming the rest of the stuff you guys are talking about in terms of CG height and kinematics. And there may be a big change.
I'd just be wary of leaving a 1-inch difference on, especially on an FC car.
Yeah.
With CG being pretty important, and the ground effects from the front wing
Definitely
potentially changing the balance and then impacting the driver's feedback on how it drives, not just the lap time.
No question. And I think this is sort of a low speed test, but if you do both, if you run it with no changes and then lower it, deal with what you can easily from geometry.
Sure.
So we did actually run 18s and 16s on 11 for a little bit, and I didn't do a good job of going through all that data, but we did a few back-to-back skid pads, and it was like a 10th faster on the 16s at Park and Ride.
That's before we learned all this warm-up stuff, though. So
yeah, it was way before, and that was when the car was designed for 18s. We slapped some 16s on there.
Sure, but I mean, like, I'm sure all of us would give our left nut while we're standing there next to skid pad watching the times come in for that 10th, right?
Yeah, I know.
So
that's part of the reason why we ended up like deciding on this tire anyway.
That's the reason. We're all Lance Armstrong.
Yeah. So I mean, the going down the route of testing the tire dope to try and make the 18 or the R25B compound work as well as the LC0 at lower temps, I think that's very cool development. I think there's potential there, but there's also the potential that you're just shifting the performance window, right? Just like with the LC0.
Yeah, you're turning the R25B into an LC0 rubber by doping the shit out of it.
Yeah. So I think it's maybe there's a performance island that can be found there, but I don't know. My gut instinct is if you shift the performance window to lower temperatures, you're going to lose out on the high temp steady state performance. Maybe not. Well, maybe there's something there because it is a different compound and tires don't behave how you'd expect all the time.
Yeah, we got to test.
I was actually thinking the opposite because for two reasons. One, we know the construction's different, the carcass.
Sure.
And two, we can dope the crap out of them and run them not this coming year, but every year after, we can dope the crap out of the first day's tires and not dope the second day's tires, or
Sure.
so partial dope or whatever.
Because you have to declare your tire.
You cannot change tire compound, but you can use it doped and undoped.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's an interesting point. I like that. It's a really interesting point. This is usually a really bad idea every time I've seen it done, but have you tried running split sets of different compounds on different ends of the car?
There's one team that does that. Michigan Ann Arbor. They're one of the top 4 teams. They run, I don't know about going forward, but they have run 18x6 LC0 front, 18x7.5 R25B rear, and they prioritize XL.
Yeah. I think that'd be something that would be interesting, almost from just a scientific study. Anytime we run a split set in GT racing, it's usually like running hards on the left side and softs on the right side, so that your balance isn't super screwy as you go through corner entry, mid, corner exit, and your temperature profile changes throughout that, right? You don't get big balance shifts. Like, that's the one thing that I'd worry about running an LC0 on the front and an R25B in the back is your front tire switches on first.
Yeah, agreed.
Right, which can be scary.
Yeah, the other thing we discussed a little bit was running alternate widths, because then you can run a wider rear wing, because the rear wing is limited by the tire width.
Sure. Is that the end of the race car that you have the most trouble getting aero performance out of?
Not anymore.
Okay. I know with open wheel cars, usually the front is the end of the car that generates the most efficient downforce easiest. Just don't know where you guys were at.
That was my understanding as well.
We fixed that for SR11.
Yep. Cool.
One point on the different compound Michigan runs, they could be doping a tire. If what you guys think is the case, you can shift the performance of one of those tires by doping. So it's very possible they can do that.
Yeah, true.
Cool. I like what I'm seeing though, the idea of doping your skid pad Excel autocross tires to the LC0 performance window, and then getting a regular set on for endurance is good. I think we did that on SR7. It was entertaining watching people get pissed off in the paddock. We went out and did a warm-up session prior to going out to autocross, and we had like the tires still saran wrapped with all the dope. And it went out, we did our quick little warm-up course, brought it in just to clean up the tires. And then we wanted to pick up the car and put it on the jack stands to wrap up the tires and keep them clean. And the car stuck to the ground, like audibly like brought up chunks of the surface with it. And just people just like were, what the fuck? And then like left. And I have no idea if like our tire doping program wasn't as detailed as this one. It was just like, we're going to try this. And it kind of seemed to work. And there wasn't any back-to-back testing. Not a lot of work there, but like our driver's feedback was the car feels too stuck. Like Martin McKeefrey's feedback was, I can't get the rear to work because it's stuck. Like it's stuck. I'm like, planted? And he's like, not planted, just stuck.
Like you're bogging the engine, it's so stuck to the ground.
Yeah, kind of. It's just like it's the car it's not playful, right? It doesn't give good feedback because there's certain things that the drivers are feeling and cueing off of, right? In order to know that they're close to the limit on the rear. And I think that doping the tire changed its performance enough that they couldn't rely on the same feedback from the car. So it kind of threw them for a loop. which was
That's really interesting.
yeah. But we also did do it wrong once or twice where
Yeah, I talked to
Didn't think
Bobby a
so.
bit about this as well. Yeah.
like we rooster tailed all the compound off of the readers once in like one Excel run. So
Was it fast?
no, it was frighteningly slow, and they recorded. The readers were recorded by the time we got to the end of the Excel run, pretty much.
Jesus.
Yeah, so that seems to be sort of like it keeps coming up periodically, is the year that the team just destroyed a set of tires with the doping, and the consensus seems to be that it was the compound was just disintegrated by or dissolved by too much duration or too much exposure from the doping material. But
You
I
guys
don't
have
know
to
if you have
get
any
like a
second
layup
thoughts on that.
process, right? It has to be timed. It has to be monitored.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So we have a process right now, but just the process on the back of the can, right? But we also talked to Bobby about what had happened in the past. And my understanding of that particular instance is that they doped a tire, wrapped it up, left it in a bag for like a month, and then took it out and ran on it.
Yeah, it was one of those situations where we doped tires for a test, and then something happened, and we didn't do the test.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm recalling it right, but yeah, I think if you guys follow the process and you're even documenting what the durometer is, and plotting that against temps, I think you're way ahead of where we were.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. Is like, just as a random anecdote, one of the things I've gotten in the habit of is any consumables that go on my personal car, like whenever an oil change gets done, I date the oil filter. So you might want to just have like a part number or code on the tires you put on, and then a document on Google Drive that sort of has all the metadata or the relevant information relating to that set, like when they were installed, how many test days, if they were doped and how they were doped, that sort of thing. I don't know, just kind of random anecdote, but just something to think about.
That's a good idea.
That goes right along with one of the requirements, which is documentation, right? And so far we've been documenting the crap out of everything.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it just looking at these slides. Like these are ready to go in a design binder, right? Like,
I mean, Joey, you tell me, should we put doping stuff in a design binder?
I mean, I think what you mentioned earlier, like the way that you sort of approached this topic in this presentation was like, hey, we were looking at different tires. And as long as you sort of look at tires at face value and you look at the TTC data, and then you say, okay, this is really interesting. Now what happens if we dope them? I think that's perfectly fine, right? But it shouldn't be the cornerstone of your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
It should be sort of a exploratory area where the data indicates, or the data that you show indicates that there might be something to this. Well, just like you said, it's like a leap of faith, and that the single source of truth is TTC because it's the lab with a piece of equipment. It's a little more controlled than some solvent that you buy on Amazon or whatever, potentially, just for the sake of comparison. So I think as long as you
the sample size of 1 at Calspan.
Sure. Well, for the sake of comparison, you kind of know there's 100 teams that have access to TTC, but there's one team that has access to the particular doping recipe that you're working with. So it's knowing what sort of stable ground to stand on, and then saying like, hey, we kind of have confidence in this, but we also wanted to try this other thing. I think that's perfectly fine.
Okay. Yeah.
and this to me is you're looking at something that's fundamental to the car's performance. Ross has laid out, and Arash, whoever's been working on this, has laid out, here's what the data has shown, here's what we've spotted in it, here's what we've inferred from it, and here's how we're going to test it. And they've been methodical enough that, like, even if this doesn't work out, what they're going to learn from it is going to be important for their tire decision and how they run the car.
Yeah,
To me, as long as
Ross, you built a tester to test the tire chunks.
If I built a tester, you mean I used an oven at my work and a durometer tester that I bought?
Oh,
the
okay.
team
I
bought.
thought you guys were working on like a little torque wrench thing.
Yeah, that is
That would
not
hold.
materialized yet. That is also in the works. Eric, you can tell me whether you
Okay.
think this is worthwhile or not. So we
No.
well, I would like to ask Eric, but
Sure.
that's in the works. So we came across a device that's like $1,000, so we're going to build our own. Basically, you cut a swatch of a donut of rubber, you push down with a spring, and you use a torque wrench to measure the cold friction against the surface. So in theory, we could do dope testing like that. And we could also compare surface mu's, relative surface mu's anyway, between different surfaces for cold samples. I guess we could heat the rubber donut, but to begin with, it would all be just ambient temp, right? I don't know whether you think that's valuable or not.
I don't know how much effort I'd put into it. I think the biggest value is maybe finding a testing surface that's close to comp, right? That's your way of making sure that you're in a representative environment rather than somebody going, oh yeah, this surface, yeah, this is close to comp.
Well, yeah, I guess the other thing, the way to use this tester would be to, when we go to comp, just, okay, now we know what its torque value is, so we can go test a bunch of other surfaces and see what's close. Because otherwise, I think it would be more subjective. I took a picture of the concrete. Oh, let's try to go find some concrete that looks like this.
Yeah, I've seen a bunch of different methods done, like scanning the entire track and looking at how much aggregate is in the surface and measuring micro roughness, macro roughness. Like it's difficult. So if it's not too much effort and you guys can get that set up, then I'd say go ahead and see what you can find. But I wouldn't expect miracles from it.
Any more questions, comments?
I've got a question about tire blankets or coverings. I know that you have some options when it comes to saran wrap, or Ross, I know that you had some blankets made several years ago.
They're long gone.
Yeah. But I don't know if you have thoughts on when and where to use saran wrap versus insulative blankets, and how that would factor into your strategy,
So
if at all.
My worry, so the thing that is not captured in this data is that the PJ1, the top dope here, PJ1 and the tire softener in this data produce roughly the same effect, right? They both soften the tire to 34-ish durometer, right? So why would we use one over the other? So the PJ1 leaves like I want to say, let's call it like a gelled resin, tacky, very, very tacky surface, right? That, to me at least, implies it may have higher realistic grip just because it's got that extra actual adhesion. And that may come back to what Eric was saying, that Martin was saying about bogging problems, which we can solve down the line. But that brings up the question of, if we put on tire blankets, are we ever going to get them off again? And if we do, they might end up being disposable. So you end up back with saran wrap. I honestly don't have a good answer for what my plan is for covering the tires.
I think the fundamental issue too is it's one thing to wrap them for Excel and for autocross, but wrapping the tires in the skid pad setup and then rolling it across.
Dude, yeah,
is not. Yeah, that's an issue.
it's a lost cause.
It's a lost cause.
Even the high toe out in the front is enough to strip them sideways.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
If we can not do saran wrap, that would be nice. Because it just sucks in general.
Can you guys just run tire dollies then to keep it clean? Or
It'd be nice.
That's a good idea.
That'd be a good
Just
intern
something.
project.
Just go
Yeah.
buy some wood dollies.
yeah,
You got to put these guys to work, man.
They can
just
do other
something that
stuff.
has big enough wheels on it to get over the bumps wherever you need to go. just to
Off-road
keep it-
dollies.
Yeah, off-road dollies.
Put some monster
I mean,
stickers on it.
So actually,
Is
it's not
Is
legal.
it crazy enough to suggest something like if you guys identify that tire temperature is huge for like the first lap or the shorter events, obviously you have to transport the car from the pits to the track, which takes some time. I guess putting the tires, like if you brought space heaters and that sort of stuff, that would look weird.
Warming the tires is against the rules.
Yeah. You have to
Yeah.
discreetly
Okay.
do it.
I have seen in the past a black storage container for the tires that happens to be sitting in the sun.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there are a bunch of tricks
On
that
the
you see.
pit cart.
Yeah.
We're not allowed to warm tires in IMSA, but we are allowed to use tire warmers in WEC. And in IMSA, every once in a while, you'll see a team with their tire cart, just like you said, and a black just cage, right? Just black tarp or black, like something thick, like insulated over the tires out in the sun, and they're running, their exhaust, the generator or the exhaust from their generators into that and filling the thing with exhaust. Or, you're at Daytona and it's 40 degrees and people are walking out of their race trucks that have,
Sweating.
temperature controlled lounges, and they're running the temp as high as they can, little stuff like that. And people get caught with IR guns and stuff and get a slap on the wrist. But there's a bunch of creative stuff that you guys can do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was John that was talking about just cranking the heater in the truck and leaving them in the passenger seat.
Yeah.
That's how we set Loctite at company, right?
No, I mean, we had this conversation about adding a space heater to plug into the cab of the rental box truck and
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
keep the
Just-
tires there.
make it like Bahamas in there.
Mhm.
I mean, SoCal is not going to matter, right? But
That's right. That's-
If it's a cold day for some reason, it's a big difference. It's a big difference. Just having them be in a room that's 90 degrees, right?
And I think talking with Fabrice, he was saying that also warming the rim at the same time so it keeps everything else warm because of its mass. As you ferry it from your warming area to the truck.
Yeah.
But would you warm unmounted tires? That doesn't make too much sense.
No, he's talking about insulating it while you're carrying it so it doesn't cool down from
gotcha.
there.
Although insulating it and then getting the blanket off may be a big problem.
I'm sure you guys will figure it out.
We have dollies with like floating insulation tents. No one's gonna be like, "What the fuck are you doing?"
Yeah.
You can't use dollies. I just read that in the rules.
You can't.
Now the driver has to be steering the car.
They can. They
No.
can.
Rear
Just make sure the dollies
The
don't have
doll-
caster wheels.
Yeah, the dollies don't have casters in the front.
might work actually.
In the rules, during transit, all four wheels have to be on the ground.
There you go. Thank you.
Damn.
All four wheels of each dolly, right?
We're 4 times better than the rules.
They didn't say which wheels.
There's an exception. The rear wheel supported on dolly by push bar, but I'm not sure what that means.
Rear wheels supported by.
Oh, there you go.
So you can float the
That's
rear
awesome.
wheels, but not the fronts.
Out the fronts. Okay.
Well, so what if we make the dollies have a piece of asphalt on top of them?
Jesus. All right. Any more questions?
It's gonna have to be a big piece of asphalt to be called the ground.
Depends on your frame of reference.
You're on your own to argue that one.
I mean, you guys are using center locks, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you can just change to a set of roller tires, right?
Yeah.
Pretty easily.
Yeah, that's
I
true.
mean, that seems like that's the only reason to run center locks in FC to me.
Light off the
I got a
shelf little
question.
bit, yeah.
So what have you guys chosen, a wet tire, or is that like
There's only one
guess
choice.
You
for
guys have a
16.
choice.
Yeah.
okay?
Actually, that's not true. We could run non-Hoosiers, I guess, but
Isn't there an option to get tires grooved at comp?
the tire, if you run a grooved tire, it must be grooved by the manufacturer. So if Hoosier's willing
Right.
to put a single groove into a slick, or grooves in general into a slick, then yes, you could run a grooved non-wet as a wet, but it has to be grooved by the manufacturer according to the rules.
Right.
I'm guessing they're not going to put that effort in for FC
Agreed.
ever.
I've seen, I can't remember exactly what year it was, but there have been efforts by some teams, like after endurance and before the Hoosier truck leaves, to get the Hoosier guy to put some grooves in a set of slicks, and then the team just uses them for next year. So
Do you
something to
think?
look into. But
Well, so are they running them as wets or dries? Are they running them as dries just to
Wet.
increase the motion of the rubber to heat it up faster?
no, not as dries. It would be as a wet set, but it would be like a R25B or an LC0 equivalent wet tire because it was grooved by the manufacturer.
But why would that be better than a wet tire?
How do they know? Do they have like data on how the wet tire
Yeah.
performs?
No,
Or maybe they wanted to test in a wet condition. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's
And
weird.
save money, I guess. Not have to buy new tires. I don't know.
something to think about. If there's an opportunity to have the guy at the Hoosier tent put some grooves in a set of LC0s that you want to test for next year as a set of wet tires, that's something to think about.
Yeah, you could do it back to back.
They fixed my dragster
Yeah.
loophole, unfortunately, where you could run the wets whenever you wanted. So if you went to California, you would bring drag radials and have the Hoosier guy put a single groove in them, call them wets, and run them for Excel.
And be quietly escorted off the premises.
Any more?
What sort of work is being done on tire models?
Can you be more specific?
I know
What
you
are you-
guys,
what are you
it looks
trying to
like you
ask?
guys have.
Do we have tire
I guess-
models?
It looks like you guys have smoothed raw data.
We have models.
You have models. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
See. Yeah, I'm actually trying to make a GUI that would make it a lot easier. Like you just have all the coefficients on a slider so you can like quickly just generate a model for whatever.
The other thing is that as mentioned when we were talking about long data, because we're intend to run, we're going to do testing obviously, but we intend to run the 16 by 7.5, and we don't have long data. The model we are assuming is correct is the 18 by 6 LC0. So it's a combined model, right? It's mashed in the 18 data. Yeah, the 18 longitudinal data.
Is it just the tire model you're building is just kind of based off of the non-dimensional?
It's
model?
Paseshka.
Yeah.
It's not it's just Paseshka. Or however you say his name.
So yeah, the magic formula is just the curve. It's just the curve fit, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So the current model does not have a thermal model in it. That there are plans to do that in the future, but
That's
right
fine.
now
Yeah, I'm not even worried about that at all. How many sort of, I mean, the minimum is vertical load and slip angle, right?
Mhm.
So you have those at least,
Mhm.
I think.
Yeah, it's just as simple as that. No
Cool.
camber, no pressure, just FZ and SA and SR.
But it sounds, based on the slides that you guys have shown, like the tire model itself isn't being used to choose the tire. It's being used to sort of judge relative changes once you've chosen a tire.
Yeah, because the tire model doesn't capture all these other things we were talking about.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. The raw data is like the best place to get like the details about which tire is best. But
It's a good start. I still
yeah.
question some of their stuff sometimes. I think the ideal way is to buy a bunch of tires and wheels and just run them. But for being free, minus what we pay TTC, and for being quick and easy, this is a good way.
I wish there was a yearly fee and we could get more testing.
Yeah. Buy them some windshield wipers for their IR sensors.
and a spacer that's got electrical contacts.
So you would be scaling down the grip levels in your tire model
So
versus
for the long data, I kind of skimmed this when we were talking about the long data, but we looked at the difference between the 18 by 6 R25B and the 18 by 7.5 R25B, right? And it's the middle two in this graph, right? So we see we go from like 525 to 575, right? So we're talking about a 50-pound gain by having an extra 1.5 inches of width, right? So the theory is if you had an 18 by 7.5 LC0, right, that you would gain the same percent over the left graph, right, the 18 by 6 LC0, right, because just from the extra width, which we get that extra width with the 16, but we lose diameter, which means we lose the length of the width goes up because we go from 6 to 7, but the length of the contact patch goes down because we go from an 18-inch tire to a 16-inch tire. And if we deflect the circle, right, we get a shorter flat, basically. So I haven't done the math right now, but we're assuming that those two things counterbalance. So you end up with roughly the same longitudinal grip as an 18 by 6. That is the assumption.
This is how you know when you're desperate to get working data.
Yeah.
This is because you're assuming the PSI is the same.
I assume that the deflection.
Yeah, by pounds per square inch, I mean pounds per square inch of contact pressure. Patch,
yeah. Correct. Yeah, so we got width, but we lost length.
So the area is the same, you're assuming?
Yeah.
It sounds like your input to your tire model, obviously the Paseshka equation is going to give you the curve, right? And then the specific shape and offset vertically and the cornering stiffness is going to be based on some coefficients.
Mm-hmm.
Those coefficients you're building based off of what you know about the 16-inch tires and what you're inferring from some of this data, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. So if you want to simplify, basically we take the LAT-F data, or LAT-F curves from the 16 by 7.5 LC0, because that's the right tire, and we take the long F data from the 18 by 6 LC0, even though it's the wrong, and just say it's probably close enough.
It's like putting frog DNA to make a dinosaur.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, boom,
What
dino
they're doing
DNA.
is fine. Like it's the data that you're getting from the rig to make these decisions. That's perfectly fine. And then if they get far enough where they have a lap sim that uses the tire model and they can make changes and add in scaling factors to help correlate the velocity trace of the car, the steering trace, the slip ratios, maybe. Then
Oh yeah, if
that's
you can
getting really
validate it
far.
with like some on-track data, that's the best part. Is you can say, hey, we may have made some assumptions, but hey, look at this on-track data. We've further refined it based on like test data. I think that's the biggest point. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't call this the beginning, or I wouldn't call it the end. I would call it the beginning, right? You're making some assumptions on the tires to make a model that helps you with a lap sim that you should then validate, right? So like you're halfway through the process.
And you just described my proposed master's project.
Yeah, but that's like thinking that they're not making the mistake of thinking that this tire test data is golden and it's applicable to all surfaces everywhere, and that all the sensors were good, and that running a tire on a belt is just like running it on pavement, right? But I think what they've done, what they've looked at in terms of the longitudinal performance and trying to spot the differences between different tire sizes, and then make that inference for tire sizes that aren't available in the test data. That's all perfectly reasonable. It's just there's going to be a lot of scaling and a lot of corrections. Ross, if this is your master's project, once you get the track data, and that's just how it goes. Like you can't get around it. You're not going to hit it perfect the first time. So it's part of the process.
What do you think would be one of the better ways of going about collecting the necessary data? We're looking at deriving slip ratio and looking at our long Fs, and then correcting the long F, potentially deriving slip angle, correcting slip angle, and then trying to do some combined stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
combined is just nuts.
Without putting a $40,000 sensor on the car.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the calculating or estimating slip ratio isn't that difficult at all. With like if you do a little investigating into like Kalman filters and you have a decent IMU on the car, then you can get real close with that. I'm sure you guys can figure that out. It's the slip angle stuff, unfortunately, you're kind of shit out of luck on that. Like no.
What about just driving straight?
That you buy is going to give you enough.
What about just driving straight with a shitload of tow?
Sure. I mean, it's a little bit indeterminate on what your loads are right and left. If you get that close and you make an assumption, and then you also make the assumption that it's equal left and right. But
I mean, the fronts would be if you're going straight. Could the driver just...
Sure, as long as the tires aren't doing anything weird. But I mean, what data can you correlate with that, right? Because you're driving straight, so all of your sum of forces is zero, your sum of moments is zero.
You're right.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting just to see what the temp does if you have the car instrumented, but I wouldn't do that unless you have a ton of money and a ton of time.
You know, San Jose State.
Yeah. Well, any of us, right? But I think as long as you can get the IMU channels to line up with your lap sim, you can get the steering trace to line up with your lap sim. Like the trickiest part of it is going to be getting a clean data set from the car with a driver that's driving close to the limit at almost all times. So
yeah,
it's probably the trickiest part. Like doing the math to build the sim, if it's a master's project, you're gonna get it done. You'll get results. That's just the time is once you get those results is scaling things and not wasting a bunch of time fiddling with the wrong parameters and then realizing that you've gone down some path and you need to go back and restart the process over for something because the steering trace was wrong and you thought you needed to scale something on the car. But yeah.
Eric, what's your opinion on the patent method sim?
The what method?
Chris Patton's.
I based a lot of my stuff off of him a couple times. I think it's a good general kind of way of figuring out the performance envelope of the car. I wouldn't put too much stock in it. It makes a lot of assumptions, but it's good for developing a car for sure. Like nobody that I know in professional racing does anything with Millikan moment diagrams or anything like that.
Do you guys just do all multi-body stuff?
I mean, at our level, we're doing like full driver in the loop.
Yeah.
Simulators. So,
but based on like a multi-body, like Simulink or other model.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's whatever team wants to do something. They have their own physics set up. They have their own whatever software that they're using for modeling, and then you throw that into an R Factor Pro environment, and everything interacts with the rig, and hopefully you're developing tire models with the tire manufacturer or on your own or something, right? But I mean, even though we have a $5 million rig to run the drivers in, and that's available most of the time, we still do a lot of quasi-static simulation with just, here's pretty much a magic formula model, right? No temperature. We stay away from pressure and wear and degradation shit anyway, because it just muddies the results. But just a quasi-static model at constant pressure, constant temperature, match it up to a qualifying lap or whatever lap gives you the most consistent data. And then you can derive all of your lap time sensitivities from there. There's no need to complicate it further with anything crazier.
I was just curious.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, the simplest method that gives reasonable results, usually what we get. A quasi-static sim isn't going to give you the pinpoint accurate results that, you're looking for, but it always give you direction on changes, and most of the time it'll give you magnitude, which is what you're looking for anyway.
Eric, knowing what you know now, do you think there's any point in spending time on a Millikan moment diagram for an FSE car?
Sure. It depends on how much effort you put into it and what you're looking to get out of it. If you make it detailed enough that it's modeling any suspension changes that you're looking at, whether that's something that's designed in like your geometry or something that you just don't want to spend a ton of money on springs because, the team doesn't have any money. Like it's all reasonable to look at and kind of give you an idea of how the car works.
It struck me that it might be more useful for slaloms modeling than it is.
It's a performance envelope of the car, whether that's in a slalom or a straight line accel event or braking event. It makes a lot of assumptions, but it's perfectly reasonable for kind of figuring things out. If you want to figure out how your aero balance is affecting your high speed handling, then it's great for that. It's going to work as well as your load sensitivity model works. You can derive some, finer second order things like stability and understeer gradient and Whether or not that's completely relevant to the car is another issue, but it's something there, right? To let you know what changes you're doing in your model that's feeding into that Millikan moment diagram are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So if Arash and Ross are working on a limit surfaces project that's based on multiple Millikan moment diagrams, basically in 3D, is that something that you think that they should maybe, the octahedron, or you've got like this sort of surface that's like looks a little more I don't know, like a sphere or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a topic for this call. Maybe we can have a separate call about this. But I'm just wondering how much work they should be putting into that, and sort of where's the limit of diminishing returns when it comes to that sort of stuff. If you Eric, if you think that like a more simplified, using a tire model and then using a more simplified envelope for a lap sim is good enough.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are diminishing returns as long as you should keep developing the model as long as it's asking or answering the questions that you really need answered, right? Like you guys don't need to know how the performance of the car is going to change with, I don't know, like a 1/10 of a degree of camber per G compliance, an extra 1/10 of a degree camber per G, right? But if you're looking for things like, should we run more downforce? Like, should we change our lift to drag efficiency target? And it's answering those questions, and those are important questions to answer. So a lot of knowing which questions are important and which are not is experience, and that's what they're figuring out. So I think they're doing fine. If they go too deep in on it, then hopefully they have the wherewithal to back off before it becomes too much of a sunk cost. But I'd hope that they're using their models right now to make decisions, not making models to show a design judge.
Yep.
The model says to put the CG on the ground.
Sure. Then you say, we have a direction. Now you need to know the magnitude of the importance of putting the CG that low, and then weigh it against all the compromises that you have to do in order to do that. That's what the model says, and it's true. Lower you put the CG, the better.
Yeah, we also had the model say that moving the CG down 10% was more important than losing 10% of mass.
And let's see, for you guys, what's your CG height?
Like 9.8.
9.8. So, okay, lowering the CG an inch is more important than losing, what, 40, 50 pounds of mass?
Yep.
No. Yeah, 50 pounds, sure.
That's about.
No.
Or are you doing 60 with
60
the driver?
pounds. It's with the driver.
60
yeah.
pounds? I mean, that's a pretty big deal. I'd say it's an interesting relationship that you guys have found, and I can't tell you if it's wrong or not, right? I mean, it's entirely dependent on if you have the load sensitivity of your model
Isn't it?
figured out.
But this is. Are you talking about just a steady state skid pad, or are you talking about something more complex?
Just an MMD.
That was just an MMD. Yes, that's my caveat. Big caveat there.
So you're getting the same lateral performance, lowering it 10% as you are reducing weight by 10%.
More lateral performance, lowering it 10%.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, sounds like
Sounds
you've done
like
some work
testing.
with the modeling and the math, and you've gotten results. And if there's any way to figure that out in real life, if you're questioning it, then go out and do that.
60 pounds of lead at the bottom of the car.
And 60 pounds on the roll hoop.
Yeah,
Well, or if you put 60 pounds low enough, you move the CG, right?
that's what I'm saying. Put it on the
That's what
bottom of
Ross
the
was
car.
saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just confused by the roll hoop comment.
Oh, that's to test it the other direction, just to
Oh,
see.
okay.
Make
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, I mean, with something that we did at some point in time with the car, and it was, hose clamping a brick to the roll hoop, and our skid pad results were too noisy to pick out the difference. So based on that, it didn't matter what the car weighed and didn't matter where the CG was.
As long as you
our
can get the
testing
tires
was so
warm.
good. No, I mean, you guys it sounds like you did all the work, got an answer on the importance of different parameters on the car, and you're questioning the validity of those results, which is all good. So I'd say go where your instincts take you next.
To sleep.
Yeah. Any more comments?
Yeah. Eric, would you be interested in a follow-up call with the team at some point? Maybe we can coordinate something.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, if there's a topic that, presents itself, or I guess the AMA would be pretty good.
Sure. I can do an AMA, I guess. Yeah, whatever. Just let me know in advance. My schedule's obviously a little bit crazy sometimes, but let me know.
Cool.
All right. I guess we'll wrap it up with that. Thank you guys for listening to me and Ross ramble for a little bit, and for John talking earlier. Appreciate all the feedback and comments and questions and everything.
Yeah, thank you for
thanks
the
again,
insight.
Eric, for
Yeah.
coming in, calling
Thanks
in.
for staying up late, dude.
Yeah, no problem.
Good luck next weekend.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, we already secured the championship, so we should be good.
All right,
Just have
guys.
to take the green flag.
All right.
That's all
There
we
you
have
go,
to-
dude.
Talk to you guys soon.
Just got to finish.
All right.
All
Nice
right,
work,
good night.
guys.
All right,
Have a good
bye.
night, guys.
Bye.